materials engineer. I've had the privilege of working on 3 different major technologies. The first one is a medical device solution in response to some materials failures that were happening in pacemaker leads back in the 80s. And I did my PhD and postdoc on those. Very much a top-down, we have a problem we need to fix, let's put a team on it kind of thing. The next 2 are quite different in that this is connected to this one. We started putting nanoparticles into these materials to further improve their mechanical performance and went from where we thought we were heading into somewhere completely different and completely non-medical. I'll explain as we go along. And this is now formed a startup company, and we're right in the middle of commercialising that. So very much top-down, very much kind of a bottom-up nanotechnology platform. And similarly, the third one I'll talk to you about really came out of left field and was invented last year. But again, it's another nanotechnology platform, this time from something that we all know about, Spinifex grasses, which cover about 30% of Australia in the semi-arid areas. So that's been a lot of fun over 30 years. So the first one, I joined UTS to do a PhD back in 1993 in the CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre for Cardiac Technology. And during the 80s, pacemaker leads were failing. A lot of medical devices were failing. They were having problems with heart valves, they were having problems with cardiac technology, hip implants, that sort of thing. And the problems were arising because people were using commoditized materials and putting them into medical devices without doing long, proper, rigorous biomaterials testing. So your insulation for your pacemaker leads, this is a polyurethane, actually not too dissimilar to what they use on the cover of golf balls today. But that's what they were using. And if you combine the physiological environment with a little bit of stress, whether that's a ligature site or whether that's a little bit of dynamic stress, you get what's called environmental stress cracking. If you dive down into these polyurethane rubbers, you have these rigid nano domains and these soft, flexible domains. If you add stress to that, they sort of stretch out in these areas, and these little areas, these soft segments as they call them, degrade. And you start getting this Swiss cheese type appearance, and obviously the insulation was failing and people were, patients were getting into trouble. So we had a big program in the Cooperative Research Centre for Cardiac Technology to reformulate these materials and make them more stable. My PhD and my postdoc was on that. I actually managed a 2-year sheep trial, implant trial, at the end of which we demonstrated that we could combine the chemistry of silicone rubbers, not that dissimilar to what you use in your bathroom, with polyurethanes to come up with something very, very stable. So at the end of spending 7 years on that, there was a Scottish heart valve company called EAIT who were also looking for biostable materials. And a spin-off was set up, and they actually eventually licensed the Elastion, as it was called, technology for their heart valves. Now, fast forward to 2009, the only remaining part of EAIT's business is the silicone-based polyurethanes, and they have recently licensed, actually a few years ago now, to St Jude, a big pacemaker company, and now there are lots of patients running around with our silicone-based polyurethanes in their devices. Very stable, and they work really well. So that's very much, as I said, top-down innovation, addressing a well-known problem, putting a team of multidisciplinary people on it and solving the problem. And certainly for medical devices, we did some in vitro trials. We then went into animals and we got a predictable increase in technology, and it went to FDA and eventually human trials, and that's pretty well understood. I came to UQ in 1999. Lived in Sydney for 10 years, but my wife fell pregnant and we both had families in northern New South Wales, and so decided to pack up and move to Queensland and got a job at UQ. So I wasn't able to work on the silicone-based polyurethanes anymore, but I decided to turn my attention to how can we improve further the mechanical performance of these biomedical polyurethanes by perhaps the addition of nanoparticles. So I threw myself into that. And over the ensuing number of years, we got funding, again, from AORTEC, from St Jude, from Cochlear, and several PhD students did work on this project. And we got some really nice improvements in the toughness and tear strength and dimensional stability of these elastomers. The sorts of things that you might like if you were going to put this material into a dynamically flexing heart valve. And that's kind of the direction I had set for this technology. We pitched to an enterprise workshop back in 2006 and eventually formed a startup company, and obviously we were protecting the technology with patents and so on. But we did a heap of work on these biomedical nanocomposite formulations, even to the extent of doing all of the toxicology. I'm not sure whether that video is linked, but we did dynamic in vitro fatigue leaching tests to measure whether the nanoparticles were coming out of the composite. We did all of the toxicity in vitro and in vivo to make sure that these organically treated nanoparticles were safe. Turns out when we did the numbers in the startup company, and this is what these nanocomposite materials look like under the microscope. You can see these little nanoscopic platelets reinforcing the material. There wasn't enough money to be made as an additive supplier into medical devices. So we were encouraged to turn our attention to non-medical applications and things like golf ball covers, super tough golf ball covers, more dimensionally stable rubber seals that can operate at higher temperatures. And this sort of work is ongoing in our startup company. But even more recently, we took this platform technology and started putting it into not rubbers, but rigid plexiglass, acrylic, polymethyl methacrylate, and discovered that we could double the scratch resistance using the same family of ceramic fillers. And as it turns out, this is probably looking like our most promising application area, so way, way away from where we started working. So I guess one of the points I wanted to make in this area of materials and innovation is that unlike the top-down innovation model, we now have this platform technology where we're looking at engaging with the market and the supply chain, trying to find out where our investors can make money, trying to find out where the technology really does have a value proposition. And in this case, it involves a lot of back and forth with the market. It's a lot more complicated and actually a lot more labour intensive in terms of business development and work. And very different compared to the first one in terms of the amount of energy that I've put into these sorts of activities. But it hasn't been a waste of time. That market engagement now I bring back to the laboratory. We make good decisions about what we're going to work on next. And I've certainly has been very, very valuable professional experience for me, and I bring that back to the University of Queensland, and I think that is quite valuable. And I will say directly applicable to the next time we have to look at the next platform technology, which is my last few slides. I mentioned the Spinifex grass at the beginning of the talk. This came out of a 5-year fundamental ARC discovery grant led by Paul Mehmet, who's here. He's an anthropologist, he's an architect, and Paul put together a very multidisciplinary team to study these Spinifex grasses. And one student of mine, Nassim Amiralian, last year made a fantastic discovery that when you break down the cellulose in these super tough arid grasses, you can produce these long, thin nanofibres which have all sorts of potential applications. You can cast these and make transparent, super strong, tough paper. And if you put these things under an atomic force microscope, you can see they have this beautiful 30 to 50 nanometer pore size, exactly the sort of structure you might like to use in a high-performance ultrafiltration membrane for water. And it wouldn't surprise me if we end up using these to reinforce these sorts of things in medical devices. So we may be back to where we started from in the first place. So I'll stop there. It's a bit of a round-the-world trip. Thanks.